Hello, and welcome to Around the Counter with Molly and Friends. My name is Molly Jones, and this is a podcast for people who care about Utah politics. With me today is the director of AI at Cinnamon Health, an AI expert, tech writer, debate coach, and my very own husband, Tyler Bettilyon. Welcome Around the Counter, Tyler.
Hey, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So glad you're here. I've been wanting to have you on the pod for a very long time, so I'm glad we finally made it happen.
It wouldn't have been appropriate for me to be the first guest. That's just too much nepotism.
Well, Dakota was first, so...
so never mind.
You know, they say in politics that when you're fundraising, you start with your friends, family, and fools.
Oh, sure.
And I feel like that's really where we're at with this podcast, is we're at the friends and family portion of...
All three categories.
That's great. So thank you so much for making some time to join me today. I know this has been a busy week for you guys at Cinnamon, and I just appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So you said to me the other day, I agree with Tucker Carlson. And I got to be honest with you, that was very unexpected.
Bold. So first thing you're going to do while we're on the air is make me publicly announce that I did, in fact, agree with Tucker on something.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
Yes, it is true, though. He interviewed Kevin O'Leary about the Stratos data center project over in Box Elder County, and I think he made a lot of great points. In particular, I think the part that stood out to me is basically Tucker just hammers him for like a good 4 or 5 minutes on why Utah taxpayers should foot the bill for this private, massive data center.
Let's take a listen.
Let me ask, though, about why taxpayers should have to pay for this if it's a private business and your tenants are some of the richest companies in the world. Why would taxpayers be required, as they now are, to subsidize this?
They don't necessarily have to do that. They just won't win any contracts. It's a competition.
But why are you getting tax breaks is my question.
Yeah, everybody, you go back and you say, what incentives can you give us to invest $15 billion in the first 1.5 gigs? That's what it takes. I have to go raise $15 billion.
Well,
That's just
okay,
the
but anyone who
first one.
starts a business, why should taxpayers have to pony up for that?
They don't. But
Well, of course they do.
others-
If you're getting a tax break and they're not, they're making up the difference. There's a state budget.
Hey, that's no problem. That's no problem. I can build it in Texas. I can build it in Jacksonville, Mississippi.
But why, if it's such a good business, would you be asking taxpayers to help pay for it without giving them equity in the company? Are you giving taxpayers shares?
No, the investors get the shares. But here's why they would do
But
it.
why would the taxpayers have to?
Well,
I mean, in other words,
I'm
if you
telling
want
you
to
why.
start a business, but why am I, as a taxpayer, forced to pay for your business? I don't get it.
I don't get it either. I don't get it either. And I think it's a good example of what happens. I mean, I think that was such a good explainer of why, to me, this data center project in large part feels a little bit out of scope. So do you want to talk a little bit about why you agreed with that?
Sure. So, I mean, just the first thing is, if the public is going to foot the bill for something, there has to be a public benefit to it. So Tucker asks about, is the state getting any equity so that, we'll make a bunch more money and taxpayers can later pay a lot less taxes maybe if the data center is very, very effective? No, the answer is no. The normal trade-off, and they get into this a little later in the conversation too, is about jobs. We say we're going to give you a tax break because this data center is going to come in and it's going to create, a little company town effect. And then there's going to be a bunch of jobs for all the people in Box Elder County. That's not really true with data centers either. This is a massive scale project. It's like the size of Bryce Canyon National Park. It's larger than Manhattan, but it's going to create like below 100 permanent jobs, whereas Manhattan has, a million jobs plus.
Yeah.
So the scale is just out of whack with what the public could possibly receive out of that data center.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for your job, you are the director of AI for a health tech startup, which means that you are actively creating AI systems that these AI data centers in theory would use. And so from your perspective as the, director of AI, do you find benefit in a data center like that?
I mean, that all depends. Like, absolutely, yes, my technology does need to run in a data center or on computers. We're increasingly looking at self-hosting, building our own small cluster because we can do a lot of what we want to do with relatively smaller models. But there is, if you believe that AI can be useful, AI has to run on computers. data centers are just big warehouses full of computers. So, lots and lots and lots of things that we use every day, whether it's like DoorDash or Uber or just your banking software, those are all running in data centers. The new scope and scale of data centers like the Stratos project, though, that is new. That is an enormous undertaking, incredibly large, much larger than existing data center projects. And I'm not convinced that there's a lot of value there. And I'm also not convinced that it's a lot of value for Utahns in particular, right? I work in Utah. Many of the people in my company work in Seattle, but we use data centers sometimes that are in Iowa. Locality to a data center doesn't create a lot of benefits. So you can put them kind of wherever and basically have, via the internet, equal access to them. There are some latency concerns if you're hitting something that's overseas. That can create real latency problems. But in general, the locality, how close you are to a data center, doesn't really substantially change your performance on the vast majority of computing processes, and especially not on AI workloads where it's computationally intensive, not latency dependent.
That's interesting. So let's take a second and step back a little bit, because a lot of the folks here that are listening to this may not have as deep of an understanding as you do. So I would like you to explain to us, as if we are your high school debate class,
Okay.
What is AI?
Sure. The first thing I tell high school students is that AI is an amorphous grouping of technologies that is not rooted in any meaningful technological through line. So AI currently mostly is used to refer to a technology called large language models. Large language models are a subset of neural networks. Neural networks are a subset of machine learning. And AI encompasses even more than that. AI is more than just machine learning. 20 years ago, we might have considered something like Google Maps to be AI. It's a
Really?
pathfinding algorithm that automatically tells you how to go from point A to point B. If you go buy a textbook from 2009, 2010, 2011, AI, a modern approach, it would be like the third or fourth edition back then. A-star graph search will be in that book. That is Google Maps pathfinding algorithm.
That is actually really, really cool. So but from your understanding, your deep technical understanding, we have had AI in our lives for a long time. We just haven't associated large language models and AI. We haven't equated them together to be what they are today in modern day. But they've been around working with technology and being the foundation of a lot of technology that we've used as a society for quite some time now.
Maybe. The joke in computer science circles is AI is anything computers can't do yet. We call everything else software.
Okay.
And the first technology where this AI moniker has really stuck are these large language models. I think there's a number of reasons why that's true. One is that it's just a very compelling and understandable technology. You type language into a computer and out comes language that sounds very much in certain ways like the way a human would talk. Very famously, Alan Turing called the Turing test now, but he called it the imitation game. One of his benchmarks for AI back in the day when he thought it would be really impressive is if you, a human, could have a conversation with a computer and on average, the humans could not tell whether they're talking to a human or a computer. And I think we've basically passed that test. There are lots of AI systems under the umbrella of large language models where now, lots of people couldn't tell whether they're talking to a human or a computer. There are some tells and there are some detection algorithms and stuff like that, but
Would you call something like that a deepfake?
deepfake is typically used to refer to image editing type technology, although I guess audio also. But no, I wouldn't call specifically like the chatbot interface where what Alan Turing had imagined is writing text to a machine, having text come back. I wouldn't have called that a deepfake.
Okay, so with this basic grounding in what AI is and a little bit of history for where it came from, why, coming back and circling back to the Stratos data center, why, in your opinion, are some of the claims that Kevin O'Leary has made about the data center and what it could produce and create so misleading?
Well, what claims? Which ones do you want to talk about?
Well, I think in particular, he's saying things, and I'm paraphrasing here, but to the extent that it's going to help, it's going to generate so much power, but it's also taking in a ton of power. It's going to have a closed loop water system, so it won't use any water, but now, they're seeking some applications so they can get a whole bunch of different water shares from the Great Salt Lake. And a couple of other things about the types of outputs that the AI or that the data centers themselves would create. And to me, it seems like there's a lot of marketing speak happening here and not a lot of real grounding in what a data center actually does.
Yeah, I think that's all very, very fair. He does a lot of kind of talking out of two sides of his mouth, and this is sort of common in the AI world. So you can go back and watch that interview with Tucker again. And in one part, he's like, well, what about the jobs? How many jobs is this going to create?
Yeah.
And Kevin is like, well, AI is going to create millions of jobs. But he's not talking about the data center. He's talking about AI, the technology. And that's also kind of in opposition to what a lot of other AI technology leaders are saying, like Dario Amodei on the record of saying he thinks that basically AI is going to replace all white-collar workers. There's going to be a bloodbath in the white-collar domain. So,
sorry, who's Dario Amodei?
Oh, yeah, the CEO of Anthropic. Anthropic is the maker of Claude, another large language model-based chatbot AI system.
And in this instance, Mr. O'Leary would probably hope that Claude would use part of his data center to fund its root work.
That's right. What I understand about the Stratos project is that Kevin doesn't actually have anything specific he wants to operate in that data center. He plans on leasing the compute power to other tenants, like Google, like Anthropic, like Amazon.
So if, in theory, Mr. O'Leary is leasing compute power out of this data center, that does seem like there might be a benefit to the state of Utah to be able to host and power that kind of work. I know in a lot of national circles, there is a lot of what I consider to be fairly reasonable discourse happening around the competition between how China is operating its data centers and working through its AI, and also the way that it's able to create and build and bring online lots of compute power. So in some respects, being able to have something like this in Utah does put us at a competitive advantage. Do you agree with things like that? Like, should we be working towards competing with China, or do we do that sort of at our own detriment?
Well, I would say that's a little bit duplicitous because there's two things that are going on here. One, you're saying American companies in general might need access to computational power. And if you buy into a lot of the very strong hype, then maybe we need to be competitive with China and continue to have computational resources available to us at that same scale. But another thing that you're implying that is actually not related at all is whether Utah businesses benefit. There's nothing in any of the contracts or any of the language or even anything about what Mr. O'Leary says publicly that suggests he's going to give benefits to Utah companies to use the data center. He's going to rent it to the highest bidder. And quite frankly, I'm not sure I think that he's going to exclusively rent to American companies. If someone from another jurisdiction wants to use his data center and pays top dollar for it, I would be surprised if he didn't accept that money.
That's interesting. So it's not necessarily a net benefit for Utah to allow data centers like this to be placed here because they're not exclusively helping Utah companies. I mean, we have Silicon Slopes, which you might hope would then power their internal, innovations from this, but it doesn't sound like that's actually what's going to happen. It might be a fraction of that total compute power goes to Silicon Slopes businesses, or maybe none. It's hard to say at this point.
That's right. And only if Silicon Slopes is willing to pay market rate. There's no benefit to the data center being in Utah to Utah data centers. If that data center was in Nevada, or it was in Arizona, or it was in Iowa, we could still bid for those projects as Utah business owners and would basically have the exact same outcome.
That's really interesting. Okay, so if you were in Box Elder County and a data center was coming to your community and you wanted to help craft policy or craft, the contracts that allowed that to come, what would result, like what might you ask for that would result in a beneficial outcome for the community that would, allow us to be pro-business, which the state of Utah really likes. We love our businesses, but also understands that there are costs, things like our water, our air, our natural resources. And also, there've been some interesting studies that say, maybe the sound or like the way that birds interact with some of the whirring. So what might be requests that you would make that would make a data center a better neighbor?
Yeah, sure. So I think you have to look at a handful of things to decide whether a data center project is a good fit. So number one, asks that you can make. You should have high expectations and guarantees even in the contracts with the municipality or the state about, how many permanent jobs there are going to be. Data centers in general are highly autonomous systems. They don't usually have a lot of long-term jobs, and many of those long-term jobs are actually telecommuting-based jobs where they're administering the software remotely. The
That's
rest of the jobs are
interesting.
kind of maintenance, replacing GPUs that burn out, making sure things like the HVAC system are still working, the cooling systems are still working.
That's really interesting. So you're saying that jobs, you might have jobs at a data center and say you have, I don't know, 100 jobs for this data center. Half of those jobs don't even have to be on site. So you would want to build into the contract a way to ensure that the local community is benefiting monetarily
Right.
from this kind of work.
Another thing you could look at is computational guarantees for public good. So you're going to host the Utah state government's needs, host all of their software systems, and at a discount rate for giving you a tax break. Or you're going to rent high performance computation to the University of Utah or any other of our public institutions, right? Or you're going to make research grants for our, computational research organizations. Those are kinds of areas where you could look to receive benefits from the data center project or equity in the company. If this is going to be a really, really profitable business and we're going to give you a tax break and make the land available to you, then we should own a part of the company, and that should make our taxes much lower in the future if the business bet pays off. At least something like that.
That's really interesting. And that keeps a lot of it local. It keeps it cheap for our businesses to benefit from it. And it also makes it so that you're not just extracting out of Utah. You're giving back to the state, to the community.
Yeah, and I think extraction is a really good word in this kind of context, because the other side of the equation is not what you're getting, but also what you're giving up. And so other things that make a site really good for a data center is abundant, cheap electricity. We have decent electrical prices, but the Stratos data center is reportedly going to use more electricity currently than the entire state. So we don't have such an abundance that, we really fit that check mark. 2 is resources to cool the machines. That's water in most cases. The American West, notoriously wet, obviously. And then 3rd, in the valley at least, we have a lot of air pollution problems. And these data centers, since they have to build all of their own electrical supply because they're going to use more electricity than the entirety of the state, are typically designed to have natural gas generators on site, although Elon Musk has been caught using methane generators on some of his sites. And those are highly polluting and will contribute to air quality problems that we have. So when you look at and then the sound that you mentioned. So when you look at a data center site, to me, you want to find a place where you have access to cheap, abundant electricity. Usually that means either nearby solar or wind farms, because that's very, very cheap, abundant electricity. You have a reasonable abundance of waters. Data centers are not like insanely water intensive compared to some other industries, like agriculture uses more water in general than data centers will use. But they do use a good amount, and what they mostly use it for is cooling. Sometimes those cooling waters get contaminated with certain kinds of chemicals, but a lot of the time they just evaporate off. So it's just water use that doesn't go back into the watershed of the area. And then you also want to look for a place where you're not disrupting either a lot of the natural world or a lot of the residential world. You don't want to be really near a data center. There's been lots of interesting reports about, like you were mentioning, the sound. People get like more headaches and migraines when they're living near data centers, and the HVAC is all noisy and all of that. And it also creates electrical demand, which drives the cost of electricity up for the municipalities where they are. So a place where there's already a good amount of industry and there's other factors, I think, make a better data center site.
Okay, that's great. So switching gears a little bit, the University of Utah, you touched on them briefly. They are actually a pretty incredible university for the computer sciences and artificial intelligence. And actually, the U made headlines this week for its Redtail supercomputer coming online. According to the U's technical specs, this is, quote, a statewide AI resource created to provide Utah's institution of higher education, state organizations, and commercial sector with access to advanced computing resources, training, and support. Redtail will accelerate and support research, education, innovation, and AI workforce development across the state. Can you explain to us what all of that means without all of that technical jargon?
Yeah, it means it's a medium scale data center. It's not the same as
It's a data center?
a data center. Just means a bunch of collection of computers in a building. That's all it is.
That's amazing. Okay. All right.
This is a bunch of computers that are dedicated resources to performing these kinds of high computation workflows, which AI is notorious for. It's a very highly computationally intense machine learning system. And they're making it available to University of Utah students, University of Utah researchers, among others. And it's a top 100 most energy efficient. I think it was ranked 76th by the agency that did that rating in the world, energy efficient data center. And I think it's in the top 200, something like 140 or 170 in terms of its overall throughput capacity for computation.
So what's the difference between a supercomputer and a data center? Because the U is definitely positioning Redtail as a supercomputer, and they absolutely do not want it called a data center.
In my view, there's not a lot of difference. A supercomputer might imply a certain kind of computer. But like I said before, a data center is just a collection of computers in a warehouse, and a supercomputer is also a collection of computers in some kind of housing. When you say supercomputer, you're frequently referring to very high performance processing units. So high quality GPUs for the case of AI mostly.
What's a GPU?
GPU is a graphics processing unit. They've become popular in AI workflows because they're very, very good at performing the same operation to a large number of data points all at the same time. So it's graphics processing because that's where its origin was from. And you can imagine, like, if the light gets turned up in a video game, you turn up the light on all the pixels at the same time by basically the same amount. That is the type of workflow that a GPU excels at.
Okay.
And it turns out, I'll wave my hand around the technical details, that's also very useful in AI workflows.
Okay. So why is a supercomputer really important in this moment for this university?
So I don't know if I would say really important. They've already had high performance computing operations there in the past. They could also lease or rent from other data centers if they wanted to. It is useful. It's very useful. And it's useful because the University of Utah has a lot of great research in the computer science department. They've got a long storied history. University of Utah was one of the first nodes on the internet. The founder...
What's a node on the internet?
A node is just a computer. Again, we have lots of names for computers in computer programming. It's a node, and it's a warehouse, and it's a data center, and it's a supercomputer. And... Okay. They were one of the first computers connected to the internet.
Cool.
Along with Stanford and some other places. They graduated the founder of Adobe, the creator of the CD, the founder of Atari, the founder of Pixar.
Wow.
Lots of great computer science research happens at the U of U. And so it's useful to have access when you're doing computer science research to high quality computers.
And it seems like in a lot of ways, the University of Utah has punched far above its weight in, just like, as you've said, just in a bunch of different categories. And so as you're, daydreaming about the future, like, what do you think that the supercomputer might produce, Like, can you make any prognostications of the future?
Sure. In a really perfect world, the type of research that would be done there is something similar to like what DeepMind did with AlphaFold. So AlphaFold is a machine learning system that can predict the folding structure of proteins. And it turns out that this is very important. It's not just about the chemical composition of a protein. The way it folds has a lot of important biological effects in how that protein interacts, say, with the human body. And so this kind of system is very useful in things like drug discovery. It's useful in understanding interoperation of all sorts of biological processes because proteins are very important in biology.
And DeepMind is the company that was operating this particular.
Yeah, that invented the AlphaFold algorithm, let's call it.
Okay, so you are saying essentially that the Redtail supercomputer could be used to advance biological, like it could be used to partner with like the Huntsman Cancer Institute.
Sure.
And, I did do a little bit of reading and it seems like they're talking about maybe integrating some of those systems so that an AI or probably an AI, excuse me, correct me if I'm wrong here, would be able to look through all of this research and all of these studies and all of this data that the Huntsman Cancer Institute has. And maybe we can find a breakthrough that helps with a certain type of cancer or a relief or a drug treatment.
Exactly. And another example that'll almost certainly happen, like you mentioned the Huntsman Cancer Institute, the computer science department there also has a program called the SKI program for scientific computing. And they've done a lot of like imaging analysis. So algorithms that can help you, further back in time, just understand and visualize, let's say, the results of an MRI scan. And pushing into kind of newer artificial intelligence workflows, algorithms that can automatically detect tumors in those scans, for example. Those are examples of the kinds of research that I hope the Redtail system will be used to further.
That's really cool. And that feels to me like a deeply helpful and useful outcome of a data center, an AI model. Like this is what, in my opinion, we should be using this cutting edge technology for, is the broader betterment of society, not for the enrichment of a single person or a small company, but to actually make our communities, in this case, healthier.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with that. Again, if the public is going to give something up, so this is a public institution, the University of Utah, and public funds almost certainly were used in the development and building out of Redtail, then it's got to be used for the public good. And curing cancer is obviously in the interest of the public good. If that is an outcome that, the Redtail data center helps us get a step closer to, that'd be a wonderful and amazing outcome, right?
That's awesome. So Governor Cox recently announced a $5 million Utah AI Moonshot program seeking to create big advancements in state priorities like water, mental health, and healthcare. I'm curious, with all of this context, how can public interest research infrastructure like this moonshot help Utah further?
I think the most important thing to do is to try and find areas for those grants that are clearly in the public good and are also the kinds of things that won't be done by private industry.
Oh,
right?
really?
Yes, absolutely. Because to me, one of the main key functions of government is to do things that are good for society, but aren't necessarily profitable, right? And libraries are good for society, but they aren't necessarily profitable. And we run the fire department at a loss every year. The fire department doesn't make money. It's a cost center from a private business standpoint. But obviously, we're all better off when the fire department doesn't come up and ask you for $100 before they put your house out. They just do it because it's better for everyone. If when your house is on fire, you can call someone and get it saved, right? Or when, the hills are on fire right over here, someone will go there and put their life on the line for all of us and not expecting us specifically to pay them. And those sorts of problems, the problems where the profit motive is a bad motive, it creates bad incentives, those are exactly the sorts of things that public research grants, in my view, should be going to.
That's really interesting. I think one of the most famous examples of a AI moonshot that I've heard of was gosh, I forget who it was, but someone put out a request to use AI to read scrolls from Pompeii. And they were trying to figure out how to figure out what these scrolls said and what was inside them. And I thought that was I thought that was a really cool use of the technology to be able to preserve natural artifacts, but still gain archaeological and historical relevance without ruining that, very fragile piece of papyrus.
Yes, absolutely. And to my point, not very profitable to do.
No.
There's not a lot of money in preserving ancient scrolls.
No. No, certainly not. Okay, that's really interesting. So, there's been a bit of a backlash towards AI recently. And I guess one of the things I'm worried about is what this means for the advancement of this technology. I think that there is this interesting balance that that policymakers versus innovators need to kind of balance for the betterment of society. And I'm curious what you think about some of those tricky conversations that are starting to happen.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here. Let's start with Stuart Adams, because one of the things, I don't want to say that he lost his primary because of AI or the data center per se, but he lost his primary because it became clear that he was corruptly engaging with private interest to sell out the public interest, and AI was implicated in that. And I think that that's actually a pretty common story in the world of, especially now, Silicon Valley big tech. So thing one about the AI revolt to me is that it is a smaller point in a broader backlash between Silicon Valley. So we've got Peter Thiel, who is very, very involved in Silicon Valley investment community and also very involved in JD Vance's rise to power. We've got Stuart Adams back channeling with Kevin O'Leary to help get him connected to the kind of people who can make him allowed to build this massive data center. We've got Elon Musk, who became very, very involved in Donald Trump's election and then became a part of the federal government in Doge, where he dismantled a ton of programs and then left and subsequently became the world's first trillionaire. So I think all of this is connected. And so one thing that I think is happening is that people are really, really frustrated with these very wealthy, very out of touch Silicon Valley billionaires telling them how to live their life and controlling their politics, etc. So that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Two, I think the public statements by a lot of those very same people are so woefully out of touch. Like, it's shocking that the backlash didn't come sooner. Dario Amodei saying AI is going to take every white collar job. It's going to be a total bloodbath, and we're going to dismantle 70% of white collar work. Well, what do you think white collar workers are going to think about that? You can't say stuff like that and then expect to be lauded as a hero.
But I think, the other side to that argument, if I'm, thinking with my Silicon Valley hat on,
Sure.
is that they are saying that what they're doing is they're taking away your burdens from you. And don't you want that?
I would love to believe that Sam Altman wants to take us to the future of Star Trek.
Sam Altman being the CEO of OpenAI.
OpenAI, yes, and formerly president of Y Combinator, a big startup incubator in Silicon Valley. But I just don't.
Why not?
All of the evidence that I see is that these guys are collecting wealth for their own purposes. And if they want me to believe that they're going to take me to Star Trek, I'd like them to prove it before I give them the keys to the kingdom. They're promising, hey, we're going to make a ton of money, and we're so going to make the world a much better place. But if you look at how they're actually effectuating their rise to power, it involves a ton of exploitation of poor communities, both here in the United States and in the global South. So all of these AI algorithms are trained. They are trained primarily on data that's labeled by humans. A huge majority of those humans are paid $2 a day or less, living in the global South, to endlessly look at and flag certain pieces of data. So if you're talking about the kinds of things that power your Flock AI surveillance technology, they're looking at license plates and writing down the license plate number for
And they're-
$2 a day.
And they're doing that outside of the US with none of our strict regulations and rules. These companies and these CEOs are just exporting our data without any of our, consent somewhere else. And you think that's a problem.
That's right. And they're doing the same thing with data centers. If they can't build Stratos in Box Elder County because the democratic system rejects that process, then they're going to do what other companies have done in the past and build them in weaker municipalities in Chile or in Africa or anywhere else where they can exploit and extract. I think that is a big thing that is powering this revolt, is that we're tired of having very wealthy people from Silicon Valley come into our community and extract.
Well, I think a great example of this is since roughly 2016, Elon Musk has been saying that there is going to be self-driving cars.
Sure, every single year since 2016, he's promised they've been right around the corner. And yes, I think this is another perfect example, is why should we believe people like this when they're demonstrably lying to us? So 2016, he promises that. And then at the same time, we have Lyft and Uber start their self-driving projects. Cruise Automation starts their self-driving project. I think it was in 2018 maybe or so, I want to say. The CEO of Lyft said by 2022, human drivers on the road will basically be a thing of the past.
Is that real?
Yeah, it's the quote's in Vanity Fair.
Oh my goodness.
And then obviously that didn't happen. And now Lyft has totally abandoned self-driving cars and Cruise Automation is out of business. And Waymo is basically the only one really still operating. And Tesla has its self-driving system, but they're not operating any robo-taxis or anything like that. And it's basically just fancy cruise control.
And there's a lot of complications that go along with self-driving cars in particular. Like one of the reasons that it works so well in Arizona is because it has pretty consistent weather. So if you you just took all of those self-driving cars and planted them in somewhere like, where is it that they have stick season? Is that that's up in Virginia, I think, or one of the northeastern states?
You're telling me.
And the stick season is it's incredibly muddy because it's so wet and it's rainy, so that creates a lot of interesting complications. Or you put them in a place like Seattle where you've got rain all the time. Those systems are not as good, and there's a reason why they don't operate in those places. And there's also a reason why they don't operate here in Utah, because we have pretty consistent weather patterns. We have an incredible winter usually, and we also have, pretty consistent monsoons. And so those weather patterns really disrupt the ability for the cars to operate.
Right.
Can you explain some of that? Because I'm not sure that everybody really understands some of those constraints.
Yeah. So machine learning systems often struggle with a kind of last mile problem. So at the same time that Lyft and Elon were promising self-driving is right around the corner, the CEO of Waymo was saying, this is going to take a lot longer than people think. You should prepare for a slow and careful rollout. That's what we're going to do. I don't think it's an accident that they're the ones still in business. And the reason for this last mile problem is that AI systems are pattern matching machines that struggle to generalize. Okay, so let's take self-driving as the first example. In self-driving, there are a number of hazards on the road where humans generalize them very, very easily and say, we're going to treat them all more or less the same. It doesn't really matter if it's a dog, a deer, a kangaroo, or something else in the road. You're going to slow down, stop, wait for the thing to pass. But machine learning systems really, really struggle with that. And machine learning systems will learn to say, we train one in Michigan to drive, and there's deer all over in Michigan, and it learns to drive safely around deer. And then you drop the same self-driving system in Australia, where roo and wallaby are the primary hazards in the road. The machine learning system will see a wallaby in the road. It will not think that's deer-like and stop. It'll instead say, what's that? And hit it.
It chooses to hit it?
It might choose to hit it. It might choose to swerve. It might choose to accelerate. A great example of this was, I can't remember which self-driving system it was, but there was a fatal accident between a self-driving car and a pedestrian. But the pedestrian was walking their bicycle. They weren't riding their bicycle. And the system thrashed back and forth between identifying it as a bicycle and a pedestrian. And because that situation where something was a bicycle, then was a pedestrian, then was a bicycle, then was a pedestrian, is not in the training data anywhere, it behaved erratically, struck and killed the person.
That's honestly fascinating. Talk to me a little bit about training data. What is it? Why does it matter? Why should we care about it?
Sure. So all machine learning systems are built in a way that requires training data. And this is one of the things that separates the broader bucket I talked about of all of AI from machine learning, where large language models and self-driving cars are both primarily machine learning systems. What that means is, instead of humans creating a specific algorithm that does specific things in specific circumstances, we instead create an algorithm that can read data and then adjust itself as a result of that data. And as you read more and more data, you become more familiar with more and more situations, and you get better and better at performing the task. So a simple example is, let's say, in a self-driving system, you have one subsystem that's just designed to know if a traffic light is green or not. You would send that system several pictures of green and red and yellow traffic lights. You would label those data as this one's red, this one's yellow, this one's green. And after seeing, several, and by several, I often mean millions of examples of this phenomenon, the algorithm would adjust itself in a way that it can now identify red and yellow and green. But we don't do anything explicit to map those images to the outcome at the system level. We design the learning system, then we feed the system that data, and it adjusts itself as a result.
And all of this is really important in the broader context of the data centers in Utah, the ones that are in Tooele, the Redtail project, the Stratos data center, because what's being stored in these data centers is largely this training data that then is being utilized to create these programs and these other,
Yes.
functions that come out of it. But we have to be able to store them somewhere to train the models on them to function, at the end,
Yes.
user experience.
But even more important than storing the very, very, very large data sets is processing the training algorithm itself. The training algorithm is typically the most expensive part of any machine learning process.
Okay. So with all of that being said and all of that information and all of everything that you've explained to us today, do you support AI regulation at a national level?
Oh, yes. I think there are lots of things that need to be done at a national level, and especially some stuff that just can't be done literally by any states. So I'm encouraged to see, actually Utah has some pretty interesting and good, some of them very, very sensible AI regulations. Texas is doing some of that I'm familiar with because of my work in healthcare. Texas has a law where an AI system is not allowed to make any clinical decision. And so it can make a suggestion, but a human has to review the suggestion, sign off on it, take responsibility for it before moving on.
Similarly, in Utah, there was It was House Bill 452, and it regulates what mental health chatbots can do within the state of Utah.
Mhm.
That seems very compatible. And this is the Utah has a unique AI system. It's housed within the Commerce Department, and it's called the Office of Artificial Intelligence Policy. And they're sort of interfacing between legislators and the government itself to advocate and analyze and, I guess, move forward.
Yeah, make
AI.
recommendations for policy.
That's really interesting. So if you were let's just wave a magic wand, you sit in that office, what are the kinds of recommendations on regulations and policy, and I guess also advisements you're offering to the governor?
Sure. So at the state level, I would kind of focus on a lot of things that are similar to what they've already been doing. One of my favorite laws we passed is just such a no-brainer, so sensible, is if you're in a business, a line of business that is already regulated by the state, and you release an AI chatbot that can interface with your customers, your AI chatbot can't break any laws that a human could break. So
That seems so sensible.
doesn't it just? So if you're an AI doctor, you can have the hospital system be held liable for malpractice. And if you're an AI salesman, then you can't lie to your customers if a human couldn't lie to your customers in any line of regulated business. That sort of thing is very valuable. I think to bolster those sorts of laws, I would try to focus on areas of transparency. So trying to force businesses to release transcripts of those AI interactions if, you get a subpoena for them or something like that. Or making it even easier for state auditors to gain access to those kinds of things so that you can see if they're in violation of the law. So transparency, I think, is a really good thing to try and experiment with at the state level. I like that at the state level, we're experimenting with, this Texas law I mentioned before, where you have to have a human in the loop for healthcare decisions. I think that's very wise. I think that's a good kind of angle. And then also, I think in some cases, states and municipalities, like to circle back to the data center, there's always a physical side of all this computation, taking seriously their natural resource protection type laws. So land use policy, making sure they're using your electrical infrastructure appropriately, that they're using your water infrastructure appropriately, stuff like that.
And then I sidetracked you. Can we ladder back up into the national debate?
Yes. So I think there are two big things that I'd really like to see the federal government do. The first is something about intellectual property, trademark, copyright.
Every lawyer everywhere is applauding.
So, for example, Anthropic just paid out the largest copyright settlement in American history as a result of their training procedure, where they downloaded data from the internet, often from what are known as pirate websites or shadow libraries, where it's just like every book that was ever written is in those libraries. They took them for free, they trained their model on them, and there isn't actually any law. And because the lawsuit was settled, that's also not become case law. So we are still in a situation where it's a giant question mark. And muddling matters further, Meta was subject to a very similar lawsuit where they had downloaded the exact same shadow libraries and were not found to be liable, did not have a massive settlement. So how can American copyright holders look at those two things and say, I know what my rights are? I think we need to have, at this point, the technology is way elaborated to the point that we must have some kind of clear copyright law that was written with the technology in mind and subjects these companies to some kind of regulatory scheme. I'm in favor of holding that I think that using something for training data should be considered a copyright infringement if you don't have a license agreement to do so. But even if the American system decides that that's not the case and we should go the other way, we should have clear law about what it is. Because right now it's just a big black box. We don't know.
Fascinating. Do you think that, because it was a little complicated at the federal level, AI regulation. Under the Biden administration, there were some rules where they were requesting that if companies, like Anthropic or OpenAI, were releasing a new model, that they somehow check with the Biden administration first.
Yes, and there were some limits on if your AI doesn't use this much units of computation that you're subject to this law, and if not, then you're not. And then the Trump administration came in and undid all of that, and in fact they almost made it illegal for states to regulate AI. In fact, they had a major deregulatory push. And so that's another thing where I'm not a big fan of governance by executive order, because you just get this whiplash effect. And that's why I think we need actual law on copyright. And the other thing that I would push for especially is privacy laws. And these are both kind of related, and they are core to a truth about modern AI systems, machine learning systems, I should really say, which is that the thing that matters the most is the input data. The algorithms are always changing and in flux, and exactly what happens to that data is always changing and in flux. But right now, Americans do not have any kind of meaningful digital privacy law protecting our communications from being slurped up and included in training data or
Something,
anything else.
and sorry to cut you off. An example of that might be like the EU's regulatory,
Yes,
like every time I have to click the do not track my cookies for every
GDPR.
website, that something like that might be helpful.
Yes, and California has a law. I can't remember what it stands for, but I'm pretty sure the acronym is CCPA, California Consumer Protection Act. Who knows? But that's only in California, right?
Right. And it's only in Europe. Right. Exactly. Okay. So historically, you've been pretty anti-tech establishment. Writing in March of 2020, and I quote you, San Francisco has become a paradoxical and grotesque fusion of the Great Gatsby and the Grapes of Wrath all at once. The contrast of Hearst-style wealth run amok and the shocking Dust Bowl-esque poverty of so many Bay Area residents is hard to witness, let alone justify. The longer I lived here, the harder it was to turn a blind eye to these facts. This is the community built by all that Silicon Valley ambition and wealth. This is the legacy of my industry. This is the situation after many years of democratic rule and liberal policies that I support. This sucks. Do you still feel that way?
I think the main thrust, yeah, it still resonates with me. I will say many of my friends who are still in the Bay Area tell me that the poverty situation has improved significantly since we moved away in 2020. So kudos to them for whatever changes they made. But I definitely do feel it is still very much a dichotomous city where there's an immense amount of wealth, but also an immense amount of poverty. And it gets back to when you're talking about this AI revolt, what people are very tired of is this incredible extraction.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely feel that we are in a kind of 1920s style Great Gatsby Gilded Age where the rich are incredibly powerful and they are more and more involved in our government than ever. And they are making backroom deals with the politicians that we elect, and we're often very powerless to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is a huge problem with the way Silicon Valley has always operated, but I think it's more of a problem now than maybe it's ever been. We have extraordinary concentration of wealth, and that extraordinary concentration of wealth into a few small companies and a few people, few billionaires, has had, very deleterious effects.
Okay. That's a pretty strong critique. I love it. So you're a bit of an AI skeptic, and maybe that's not quite the right framing, but when we've had conversations before, especially when people like Sam Altman of OpenAI come out like he did maybe 2 weeks ago and say, my AI has broken free of its test environment. It hacked Hugging Face and it's running rogue. Like you're kind of skeptical that that's actually happening.
Well, I'm very skeptical of public statements made by people who are invested deeply in the public statements that they're making. I'm an AI CEO, and I believe that AI is going to be the most important technology in the world, So I think there's some of that going on. I think this technology is very powerful and interesting. There are some people I like. They run a newsletter now called AI as Normal Technology. And I think that they have a much better, more grounded framing for how technologies kind of progress through the world. And for the record, they think like the internet is an example of a normal technology. And also, the internet is kind of analogous to what we're seeing in AI in a lot of ways, where there was a ton of hype in the 90s, right? A major boom. And then obviously the dot-com bubble burst. And the lesson of the dot-com bubble was not that the internet is a useless technology, right? Obviously, we're using the internet all day, every day, many of us, and it did dramatically change society. But The bust was about a ton of people getting way ahead of their skis, Silicon Valley hyping up the internet to be something that it wasn't capable of being back then, and in some ways isn't even capable of being now, even though it definitely mediates a huge part of our life. And, Silicon Valley also has like a very long history of doing this. How many of you are still buying NFTs, for example? Not so many. And did the metaverse actually happen? Right? So this sort of thing happens in Silicon Valley all the time. And I think it's very useful to take whatever a CEO says about their line of business with a big grain of salt, right?
Okay, so how can folks like surf the news of the waves and the news of information that seem to flow forth every couple of days about AI advancements and life-changing AI developments? Like, I guess one of the things I'm having a
Sure.
hard time with is, how do I tell the difference between someone, as you're saying, who's a CEO who's really hyped about their product and a genuine concern that could harm myself, my business, my community?
Sure. So I would say one is read a variety of sources. Just honestly, going back to debate coach mode, basic media literacy will help you in this domain as it helps you in every other domain. So consider the source. Is this person invested in selling their product? Is this just one other form of hype-based marketing from Sam Altman, right? Or is this a third party who's not really invested? And also consider their credentials. How serious are they? Do they have a history of publishing on this kind of thing? Like Sam Altman is not an AI researcher. He is in engineering, has a history of engineering a bit, but most of his engineering was in like web development. And then he ran a startup incubator and now he's head of OpenAI, but he's not producing the models. He's not really that deeply familiar with the way that they work. 2, read a variety of sources with a variety of different backgrounds, with a variety of different biases, and then come to a conclusion. So follow this newsletter, AI as Normal Technology. They'll have a very different view than many other sources. Another person I really love in this area is Karen Howe. She wrote the book Empire of AI. She's a believer in the power of technology in a lot of ways, but she's very skeptical of the systems of power that have been built by Silicon Valley. And her book is amazing in cataloging some of the abuses of that system. Things that I mentioned, like data centers in Chile that are, soaking up water, similar to how they're threatening to here in the American West, exploiting those low-cost workers in the global South for labeling of AI training data. So consider a variety of sources. And then 3, I would just say, take a deep breath. And, there are lots of things that are going to mediate how this technology progresses through society. There are legal structures that'll limit its use. There are personal preferences that'll limit its use. There are, literally inability to build these giant data centers because we don't have the electrical infrastructure to power them. So there are physical constraints that will limit their growth. And for everyone who's saying that this stuff is right around the corner, it's right around the corner, it's right around the corner, I would just challenge you to again see 2016 when Elon Musk was saying self-driving is right around the corner. Things take time, and this technology is progressing fast, but in some ways it's also not. And like, to circle even one more back to the AI revolt you mentioned, one thing we didn't say that I wanted to is that another thing people are revolting against is the distance between their own experience with this technology and what the CEOs are selling them. So they're saying like, this is going to take your job, this is going to take your job, this is going to take your job. And then people start using it and they're like, I don't think this is going to take my job. And in some areas, it's very, very impressive. I'm a software engineer and I use AI to do software engineering and I do find it helpful. And it has been getting better. But then at the same time, sometimes it just gives terrible, terrible results. And the same is also true of the product that I build, where we didn't really talk about this, but I build a system that answers questions in a healthcare context to apply for prior authorization. And oftentimes, the model, when it has access to good quality health records and the charting has been good and we get it, can answer the questions. But every once in a while, our human in the loop, our physicians who are using the system go, what? When they look at one of our answers and they flag it for us and we try and fix it. But, the models are definitely not superhuman in this domain. And that domain, by the way, is just answering bureaucratic questionnaires.
Mhm.
So if they're not even superhuman yet at answering bureaucratic insurance questionnaires, are they really on the verge of being superhuman at literally every task?
I've heard you say before that the AI is just math and that we don't really need to be afraid of math.
Well, I don't know about not being afraid of it. You can do some incredible and dangerous things with math. It is also true that the models are literally, not, figuratively, not kind of sort of, they are very literally math functions. And if we had enough space, they're very large math function, but you could write the entire math function and then process it. It would take you a very long time to do it. But yes, they are just math functions. And I don't know that that necessarily means you shouldn't worry that they can become powerful or dismiss them too much just because they're math functions. But they do have certain, very interesting limitations. And one of the things that I'd hone in here is they fail in ways that are unhuman. Okay. Here's an example that the listeners can try at home. If you open up like Gemini or OpenAI's GPT, ChatGPT, or Claude, or any of them. I haven't done this demo in the last month, so maybe they've finally fixed it, but you can try it. If you punch in to one of these AI systems the following words in any order: goat, cabbage, river, boat, how. Okay.
So this is a classic problem that you're like picking at, right? And it has a solved solution.
Well, no, not necessarily. What your viewers at home are probably now seeing is the AI is saying, I think you're talking about the goat riverboat processing riddle, where you have to, and there's a goat and a cabbage and a wolf, and you have to take them all across, but they eat each other. So you have to take the goat across first and leave it there. Then you come back for the cabbage. Then you take the cabbage over and you take the goat back because the goat would eat the cabbage if they're alone. Then you take the wolf over because you can't leave the goat and the wolf alone because they'd eat each other. But if I said to you, hey, Molly, goat, boat, cabbage, river, how? You would say, Tyler, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But the AI, because it's a pattern matching machine, says, you know what? The only place in my training data that has those words together is this riddle. That's by far the most similar thing where you'd ever see a goat, a wolf, a boat, a river, and how. And then another example is when GPT-5 came out, it kind of made some headlines for being the first model to get a gold medal at the Math Olympiad. But the exact same model, the Math Olympiad, by the way, is a high school level math competition about proving mathematical theorems. But the very same model, if you asked it the question, which is greater, 5.11 or 5.9, would say 5.11 is greater because 11 is greater than 9. Which is obviously not true. And anyone who entered the Math Olympiad would never get that question wrong, right? So it fails in ways that are not like we expect humans to fail. And that's also something that, the policymakers should keep in mind. It is not like we're training actual superhuman savants to do things. We do have narrow tasks where AI algorithms are the best thing in the world. Chess. It's been a decade or more. I think it's been like 3 decades since a top-ranked chess human has beat a top-ranked chess algorithm. It's been a long, long time. But that doesn't mean that AI is better than humans in all these big, broad ways. And if you ask that chess-playing algorithm something like, what's chess? It'll say, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question because the only questions I can answer is what the next move to make is when given the state of a chessboard.
Is that real?
Yes. Yes, the algorithm only knows how to take input in a very cleanly formatted chessboard notation and produce the next move. It doesn't know anything about chess or the history of chess or the game itself.
That's amazing. Well, Tyler Bettilyon, thank you so much. This has been really informative. The last question we ask all of our folks who come onto this is, how are you finding joy in your life right now?
I've been gardening, and I'm taking joy in watching the kind of gardening that I've done. I've been able to half my water bill this year in, very drought year, but still having a lot of greenery on the property. We've got sunflowers popping off right now. The trees are still doing pretty good. We've got a few other drought-tolerant plants that are surviving in our yard. I'm very happy that I've been able to kind of capture what little rainwater we have and use plants that still have life in a very, very hot season like this.
I'm a lucky girl. You built us such a beautiful yard. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for listening today. You can catch Around the Counter with Molly and Friends on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Substack. We air on Sugar House Community Radio Sundays at 8 p.m. and Wednesdays at 7. See you next week.